Welcome to Book by Book. We're in Exodus, and we're going to be looking at chapters 17, verse 8 through 19:25. So we're going to look at 3 chapters tonight. I kind of hoped we would get to the 10 Commandments, but then this week kind of piled up on itself with some computer issues and different things. So I was kind of limping along for my research. My normal workflows were out of order, so just stopping at 19 and then giving of the law more time next week. And so we're going to see them preparing to meet the Lord at Sinai. And one of the challenges that I have today is my screen share capabilities. I have a graphic that I wanted to share with you all, and this will be in the notes. And it's just a map of the different routes. So I'll include that in the notes for you if you want to see that. That I'll post on Dropbox and include in the email link. So let's just jump in. Chapter 17, verse 8. As you can remember, we walked through different ways that the Lord provided for the people last week, and food, water, and then water again, quail, man, all these things God was providing for them. He protected them and led them through the Red Sea. Now they are working their way toward Sinai. And in verse 8, we see their first encounter with a enemy nation. So verse 8 starts with, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekites' army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven." Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. So these are the first external enemies that the people of Israel are facing. So far, the challenges they've had have been just internal for the nation, like food, water, that kind of stuff. But now they are having this conflict with the Amalekites, and we're not entirely sure where the Amalekites were coming from at this point, but they are descendants of Esau, and so they are a part of the Semitic peoples in the region. They were probably nomadic, and one of the things that is put forward as a theory for why the Amalekites attacked the Israelites, the text doesn't give us any real explanation, but it could be simply because of water. If you remember, the Lord provided water for the people miraculously, and now the Amalekites also need water for their flocks, and so they probably could have heard that the Israelites are in their general region and they have water, and so there is probably not enough grazing ground and water in the Amalekites' mind to support both nations, and so they go on the offensive. And as just thinking through the story so far, remember that the Jacob and Esau relationship is contentious, and they are rival nations all the way back to Jacob and Esau. And so this is a continuing part of the tension between Jacob's family. And so we also are reading through, and you see that Moses tells Joshua to go and select some fighting men. And we don't have, this is the first indication that Israel even had any kind of army. So it could be that Joshua was training people while they were in the wilderness of in some kind of combat. But so far, the Lord has done all the fighting for the people of Israel. Pretty sure the slaves in Israel weren't given a lot of military training. And so here we see Joshua is able to rally some people and to start to go against a foreign enemy. And so there must have been some kind of indication that the people, that the Amalekites were coming, that gave Joshua enough time to rally troops. Maybe they saw scouts from the Amalekites. There's all kinds of different things that could have indicated that an enemy was coming. But I love Moses' response is a both and approach. God did not say here that he would defend the people. As we read the text, Moses is saying, go rally up our army and let's do this. I'm going to go up the mountain with the staff of God in my hand. So Moses recognizes that this staff has some kind of authority. And like as we read through, he does not have clear direction from the Lord, but he just starts to do something. He's like, I can't fight. He's 80 something years old at this point. And he's like, I'm too old to fight. And so what he does is just hold up his arms. And this is one of those miracle stories where somehow the staff of God is the lifting up of the staff is part of the power conduit to the Lord to help the people fight. And this battle went on for hours, and Moses got tired. And so every time he gets tired, lowers his arms, battle tide changes, and so Aaron and Hur help him hold his arms up. And this is all of this so far is because Moses is just deciding to do something. He's seen God work, and so now he is trusting God to work in new and continuous ways. And one of because this is the first military conflict between Israel and another nation, one of the questions that comes up is like the idea of just war. And here Israel is being attacked, and it is a little easier to justify defending yourself, but later when we get into the conquest of the Holy Land, there's going to be some things where we're going to read that we're just like, wow, this is really violent and really bloody, and why would God want this? It's something that we will have to hold in tension in our modern day sensibilities compared to the ancient world, is that idolatry leads to destruction and death for the people of God. And the main reason that the Lord is going to use Israel in the future to drive out these enemy nations is because of their wicked idolatry. It's not because these people were inferior, like as human beings. It was because their idolatry was so entrenched in their cultures that to leave them in the land would lead to a kind of syncretism that would be bad for the people. And we will see that it is bad for the people in the hundreds of years after these events. But this battle, as long as Moses keeps his hands up, the battle goes in the Israelites' favor, and they eventually do defeat the Amalekites. And Moses, the first words that God speaks to Moses here are, write all this down. Tell Joshua what happened so that he will remember this event. Because Joshua, this is a little bit of a foreshadowing here, Joshua is going to carry on the military leadership of Israel for the next 40 years. But then also, after Moses is gone, Joshua will carry on the leadership of the nation. And so Moses is commanded to write these things down so that Joshua will have a record. So he will be able to call back to these kinds of stories and events and remember that God is with us and we do not need to be afraid. That's one of the reasons why even now, like writing out your faith story, how you came to faith, how Jesus has sustained you in difficult seasons, why it's so important to do that, because we are easily forgetting the things of God. And when we write it out, we can go back and see the record of what God has done. And then Moses' response to this is to worship. And that's what building the altar is. We do not yet have any kind of sacrificial system about, like in the law, written to give us any kind of indication other than worship. Like, this is not a sacrifice of sin, for forgiveness of sin. It is simply just saying, God, you rescued us. And the name of the altar is Yahweh is my banner. The Lord is my banner. And like a flag held up, like that is what Moses is referring to, holding up the staff. Like the Lord is, the staff of the Lord is like the flag that communicates to us, who do we belong to? Who are we a part of? And who is our Lord and Savior? And so another way is to say it is Yahweh is my signal pole, is how the text actually is literally translated. So, there's different applications that I've heard preachers make of this passage. And, one of the key things is as a call to prayer. Moses is trusting the Lord. He's essentially praying to God in his body, like physically holding up his arms. But then he also has support and people with him to keep his prayers lifted up before God. And so something to consider as we are just even going through our day-to-day life is, are we trying to do these things on our own, or do we have people supporting us? Do we have people who pray with us, pray for us, who help keep our arms lifted up? And so they are victorious, and it is a good and wonderful thing. And so I'm going to check something real quick. Just a second. Yeah, okay, good. Still recording. I'll edit that out, but had a moment of panic. So the next chapter here is chapter 18, and this is one of those chapters that is it's full of good leadership principles, and I've read several leadership books based on Exodus 18. And so let's just jump in. As we get into this, though, one of the key things is there's a foreign person, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who gives input into how the nation of Israel should be administrated. And so it's interesting just to see that the people, like Moses, is open to input from people who are not yet part of the kingdom of Israel. And there's some questions about Jethro as well. So chapter 18, verse 1. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her two sons. One son named Gershom, for Moses said, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land, and the other was named Eleazar, for he said, my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons. So one of the questions about this situation here is, people say, did Zipporah leave? Is this an indication that they were like, their marriage was on the rocks because he sent her away? But what is likely the case is that Moses knew that his life was about to get real dangerous as they went back into Egypt. And so while Moses and Zipporah and Gershom and Eleazar went to Egypt, we have that record earlier in the book. At some point, Moses must have sent her back home for the protection of their family. And so now, hearing all that God has done, and now that the Israelites are closer to the land of Midian, Jethro is like, hey, let's go see Moses. Let's see what's going on. And so he comes, and in verse 7, Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, "Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hands of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. So Moses welcomes Jethro, tells the stories of all that God had done, talking about the manna, talking about the water, the parting of the Red Sea, all the plagues, all the things God had done for them. And Jethro rejoices. He's celebrating the good news that the people of what God has done. And there's an indication here. If we remember, Jethro is a priest in Midian. And one of the things that several commentaries talked about was, like, is Jethro converting to being a faithful follower of Yahweh at this point? That's a possibility. It is possible that Jethro is turning away from all of the gods of Midian. That is a great possibility. But even if he is not, his recognition of Yahweh's greatness is important, because he could be just recognizing Yahweh's greatness for Israel. Like, he is better than any other God. And so he could be doing like just that level of celebration. I tend to think that there is a conversion type experience happening here, that he is, as a priest of the Midianites, he's seen how churches work, or not churches, how these different religious systems work, and he is having a change of heart, seeing God's work in the people of Israel. And that is one of the reasons why the plagues and all of these different miracles happen, is because the Lord wanted to bring glory to himself. The Lord wanted people to know about his goodness so that they might also follow the Lord. And so here we have an early conversion, and it's Moses' father-in-law who is converting to the ways or to trusting Yahweh. And while people may view this as just a simple turning away from polytheism to just monotheism and saying Yahweh or a higher allegiance to Yahweh than others, there's a lot of different theories, but the clearest reading would be that the Lord has drawn Jethro to himself. And so they have this celebration. He sacrifices to the Lord. And the sacrifice in these ancient cultures, up to this point, the sacrifice really was about the communal meal. It was about the coming together and celebrating what God had done. So again, it is not a sin offering. It is simply a celebration offering. And so we'll see later as Moses gives commands and laws around sacrifices, that there are what we will call fellowship offerings, where they bring the offering and they're intended to share it. Even the Passover lamb was intended to be shared with the other people and the household. And so, so they're having this big communal meal to celebrate what God is doing together. So Moses and Aaron and Jethro and the elders of Israel all come together to celebrate. So one of the questions is, did Jethro bring his own flocks to this meeting, which would make sense why he would have an animal to sacrifice. So picking up in verse 13. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Then have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied." Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country. So far, Moses has been the primary leader for the people. They've seen that as he raises the staff of God, he has authority to act on and to be a representative of God to the people. And so it seems to just make sense. They should come to Moses. He's the one who has access to this power, and so they come with every dispute to ask him about it. And you can see the chaos of the people waiting. Like, they're just milling about, not knowing when they're going to be able to be heard. And they are frustrated. Moses is frustrated. Everybody's tired. And it takes an outsider to see the dysfunction of what's happening and to help create a better plan. Again, Midian is a nation, and Jethro has experience being a part of a leader in the nation of Midian. And so he's probably just taking these principles that he learned in Midian and is saying to Moses, like, you need to do these things. And, you know, Jethro doesn't downplay anything that Moses is doing. In fact, he's trying to elevate him to be able to do the things that only Moses can do. So to speak to God, to communicate to the people God's commands. These are all things that Moses is going to do for the people. He's going to serve as a prophet, as an intermediary between God and the people. And so this division of labor is essentially making the nation smaller and more manageable, to be able to divide up into tribes and clans within the tribes, and then family groups, to share the load on making these kinds of decisions. And then ultimately the difficult things would make their way to Moses, and he would seek the Lord. And so when we look at the law in the coming months, one of the things to note is there are laws that are like just real specific. And it's the kind of law that's like the only reason this is a law is because it happened and they had to figure out what to do if it ever happened again. And so there's laws about like if you get in a fight and you punch a pregnant lady, like what do you do? Like if the like how do you make that right? Like that's a very specific law. And it's these kinds of situations that made their way up to Moses. Like, oh, I don't know, what do we do in this situation? And so they make their way up to Moses, and those are the kinds of things that ultimately get codified into the 613 laws in the Old Testament, in the Pentateuch. Like that's how this works. Like the law wasn't just God coming down from the heavens with all of these different statutes and saying like, yes, if you get in a fight and accidentally punch a pregnant lady, this is what thou must do. But it was a conflict that came to the Lord, and Moses sought the Lord, or came to Moses. Moses sought the Lord, and then the Lord gave him instruction on how to handle those kinds of things. And so if Moses is trying to handle all of them on his own, nothing is going to get done. And so Jethro gives him this good advice. And so that's what he does. He appoints these judges over different levels of the people, and everybody is happier. And so he needs to to choose honorable, trustworthy men. And they would have the people of Israel would have known who those trustworthy people are, because these are family groups. These are people who know the ins and outs of the community. And so Moses, was probably already working with some of them as the elders of the tribes. The people that Jethro just had that big barbecue with, those were probably some of the people that were overseeing the thousands, and then they had some people under them for the hundreds and the tens, and so this transition of leadership, helped create a kind of a hierarchy of leadership that made the whole thing much more smooth. And so this is one of the questions in this is like, is Moses too good for some of these laws? No. Some of these disputes, one of the key things that I want us to be clear as we read through this is that in Israel, and I'm going to just read this quote, all justice was sacred to Israel. The administration of justice of whatever kind is here set in the context of sacrifice and sacred meal. The distinction is therefore not between sacred and secular, but between difficult and simple matters, those already covered by tradition and revelation, as against those requiring a fresh word from God mediated through his agent Moses. Justice is a key theme throughout all of the Old Testament. And God cares very much about justice. And so there are some matters that are easier to determine what that justice looks like. But it is, so these are the most complicated things are coming to Moses. All right, let's pick up chapter 19, verse 1. On the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So the people are making the trip. So I said because of technology, I can't share this. I was hoping to be able to share this picture. But this is the different possible routes that the people of Israel took. And I don't know if you can actually see that at this point. But there's several different places that Sinai could have been. And probably the most widely accepted location for Sinai is where to go? The red dot. Possible locations for Sinai is up this way a little bit, closer to the land. And so they make their way, they camp in front of the mountain. Now this mountain, it is also the place where the Lord met Moses in the burning bush. It's the mountain of God. And so Moses is leading the people back to the place where he first encountered the Lord. Remember, that was the whole thing, was that they needed to leave the land of Egypt to go and worship God, have a festival to the Lord. And so Moses is doing that. He's leading them to the place where they could have the festival to the Lord. And the wilderness, like we often might think of this as like desert, because we look at the Middle East and we see a lot of desert landscape, but it could also just be a grazing country that just doesn't have people there. It's open. There's no settlements. And so as they get closer to the mountain, they could have some land for a good valley for their flocks to graze, and there could be some water now nearby, especially if they didn't have to go too far from where the Rephidim, where they had the waters that came from the rock. So they are in a place where they could be close to Sinai, close to the mountain, have an encampment, but also be able to keep a distance from the mountain, because we'll see that is an important part of the Lord's interaction with them at Sinai. And here we also are starting to see God's invitation into a covenant relationship with the people of Israel. And so he's saying, like, you saw what I have done for you. I rescued you from Egypt. I brought you out on eagle's wings. And one of the funny little weird things about the way the language works, like the Hebrew word for eagle could also be like the vulture's wings. Like it could be, just a big bird that can fly long distances, essentially. And so sometimes we read eagle in the Old Testament, and we in America think bald eagle, these big majestic birds that are just so beautiful. This morning on my run, there was a bald eagle flying overhead. It was glorious. But in the ancient world, eagles were, they're just carrion birds that eat dead animals. They're not like the most majestic things that we could see in the sky. And so they don't have the same connection to them, but they're just big, strong birds. And the Lord is a big, strong rescuer for the people of Israel. And so he's saying, I brought you out. I lifted you up out of the land of Egypt and have brought you here. And now if you will follow me, if you will follow all of my commands, you will be my special possession, is what he calls them. And you will be a kingdom of priests. And, there will be a tribe of priests, the Levites specifically. But the Lord's motivation and calling for Israel was ultimately that they would all be mediators of God to the nations, that the nations would see Israel functioning as this royal priesthood, these holy people who are demonstrating what all of the benefits of living in covenant faithfulness with the Lord. So Israel would be an example to the people. Israel would proclaim the truth of God and invite people from other nations to accept him in faith. Also, Israel would intercede for the rest of the world by offering acceptable offerings to God. Israel would keep the promises of God, preserving his word already spoken and recording his word as it was revealed to them once the fullness of time had come. This was what the goal that God had for the people of Israel was to be. Sadly, they never fully lived up to it. We see in the Old Testament, they missed the mark several times. But let's get in the time machine and let's fast forward to after Christ ministry, and he's returned to the Father, and the church has started. In 1 Peter 2, 9, Peter is writing to the people, and he is encouraging them to trust the Lord. And he says this, but you, all of the Gentile believers that are coming to the Lord, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So Peter is intentionally in 1 Peter 2:9 referring back to this scene in the Exodus, saying, look how the Lord had formed a nation and had given them this calling to be a special people, to be his royal priesthood, his holy nation. And Peter's saying, now, church, that is you, Jews and Gentiles coming together. This is what the goal has been all along. And so the Israelites are hearing this at the mountain. And when we hear that in 1 Peter, we should put ourselves in that situation. We are being invited into a new covenant with the Lord Jesus, and he is unifying us. And so there are some things that are key in this covenant, and the main key is hearing and obeying. We hear the commands of the Lord and we obey them. That is what we are called to do in covenant with the Lord. And so he is doing the heavy lifting in this relationship. He's the rescuer. He's the one who does the miracles to lead the people out of slavery. And even now, the Lord is the one who rescues us from sin and makes it possible for us to have a covenant with him. And so, so we then even now must hear and obey. So faith is not just knowing the things or hearing the things. It's, yes, I will hear it and I will do what you say. That is how we demonstrate our faith. And that's what James talks about. When faith without deeds is dead. You got to hear and obey. That's how we know that the faith is alive. So let's pick up verse 7. Because the Lord is telling them to hear and obey. These are the commands. Sorry, I want to get just verse 6 real quick. Oh, that picture. So these are the words I speak. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. And so Moses goes back down. Verse 7, Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. So now he's climbing back up the mountain. The Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said, saying, they will do what you say. They will obey you. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, prepare yourselves for the third day. Abstain from sexual relations. So the elders, the clan leaders, the people that Moses had just put in charge, those are the ones he goes to say, look, these are the commands that the Lord has given to us. And they take the message to the people, and they come back with an affirmative, yes, we are on board. And Moses goes back up to the mountain. And the presence of God on the mountain is the thick cloud. Now, remember, as they've been walking through the wilderness, they've been led by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And so the Lord is going to focus that cloud in a spectacular way on Mount Sinai, Like they will know that this is the Lord's presence. And the warning that that is given is that nobody except Moses is supposed to go on the mountain. Like they are all to stay away from the mountain. And so Moses will go up and he will speak to the Lord, but the Lord will also speak in a way that the people will hear the Lord and they will trust that Moses is hearing from God, and they will trust Moses' leadership moving forward. That's the goal. And so they seal off the mountain, telling people essentially don't come past these boundaries. And even if they do come past the boundaries, they will be put to death. But how they're put to death is, they can't touch the person, like with their own hands. And so they stone them or shoot them with arrows. Somehow, from a distance, they're going to touch or to kill anybody who breaks the barriers, because they cannot run the risk of being too close to the person who is violating the Lord's command here. And so Moses is commanded to go and have everybody wash their clothes, to stay pure from anything that could possibly contaminate them. Even having sex between husband and wife, like, don't do that. Not that sex is evil or bad or anything, but it's just one more thing that's like, if you're not, like, you got to just be really, really clean if you're going to be in the presence of the Lord, is what God is saying to him here in this moment. And the only way they'll know when they can actually climb the mountain again is when they hear the long blast from the ram's horn. And so it'll be very clear what is when they can climb the mountain again. And so they do all these things. They follow these commands. The people are eager to trust the Lord. And the eagerness of this experience is interesting because, if you've read the text, the people, it does not take long for them to veer off track in the book of Exodus. They're going to see these things that God is going to do. They remember the story or the events of the Exodus. They witnessed all of it, and yet they still will fall away pretty quick. So before that's a couple weeks from now. So verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, and a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. At the sound of the trumpet, as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended on top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy." The Lord replied, "Go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and told them. And that's where we're going to stop tonight. That's the end of chapter 19. And here we have this appearance of God in the text, and the technical term for that is a theophany. And he does not appear as a human form. He comes in, his glory is in the cloud and the fire and the lightning and the thunder and the trumpet. These are all signs of God's power and majesty on display. And, one of the things that is, I believe we mentioned this when we talked about God's presence in Eden, is like his presence. Some interpreters read in his presence like as he's coming into the garden, that he came in as a storm even then. Like he was his power was reined in a bit, but it was still overwhelming, and that could be why Adam and Eve hid. Was like God's presence is overwhelming, and we are aware of how overwhelming his presence really is. And so here at Sinai, his power is overwhelming. And some people look at this and say, maybe Sinai was a volcano, and that's what they saw here. Doesn't really explain what the trumpet blasts are all about, and the voice of God speaking, and Moses going up and speaking, and God answering him, and how God answers him. Like this scene would be completely overwhelming, and we see this. The people tremble with like fear. Like this is pretty scary. What's going on? But God is appearing before the people, and they could see that God was speaking to Moses, and his intention, as we'll see, is that the people would hear God's law. We'll see this more next week. That God would speak, and they would hear, not just through Moses, but that they would also hear all of this. And so, he tells Moses to bring up Aaron, so Aaron will be with him for a while. We'll also see, in the coming weeks that Moses will bring Joshua up to spend more time with the Lord. At Sinai, there's going to be a moment where the Lord will have the elders of Israel come up, and they will dine together. Like the 70 elders of Israel will come and eat with the Lord and Moses, or eat in God's presence, I should say. So it's not that God never wants anybody to be close to him, but he is using this moment to create, to just display his power. And so ultimately, like, that the people would take him seriously and recognize that, yeah, he can do mighty things on your behalf, but he is not to be trifled with. The Lord is a force to be reckoned with. And so that's where we will wrap up tonight. Are there any questions for tonight? And so if you have a question, I will repeat it, since the microphone situation is a little different tonight. Thoughts or questions, let me know. What you got? All right, cool. No questions. So I don't know about you, but when I read these passages in Exodus, I do think of the Ten Commandments, the movie, and just how weak sauce that movie really was. Like, it really didn't do it justice. Like, it should be a lot scarier. Yeah, and reading the Bible is there's some scary stuff in the Bible, and we sanitize it down to these little like vignettes that we can paint on our children's walls, and it's like, no, this would have been intense. So the fact that Moses was bold enough to climb the mountain to be in God's presence, that's pretty intense itself in its own way. So yeah. All right, Tony, I'm glad you could join us. Carrie, good to see you too. But if there aren't any questions, cool. Next week we'll jump into the Ten Commandments, and we'll try to get as far as we can into that. But once we get into the law, there's going to be probably a lot more. There's going to be some sections where it's going to be like read 2 verses, talk about it, and then there's going to be some where we're talking about the tabernacle, where it's going to be like, we're just going to read this whole thing, and then we're going to talk about why that matters. So our pace of going through scripture is going to be changing a little bit, but it'll be fun. It'll be super fun times. Jeff, it's great to have you with us tonight. I'm glad you could join us. Fun. We're getting into it, getting into the good stuff. So, all right. Well, y'all have a good night. Also, hey, this coming Sunday, 11 o'clock service in person. Next week, our 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock are both going to be in person. So the 28th. So when you watch the service online this week, I only say the 11 o'clock, but the truth is it's going to be both because we want to test out our systems before Easter to make sure they all work. So, because last year in this whole pandemic, all our technology failed on Easter weekend. It was just a real fun time. So, yeah. So please, So stay tuned for registration for those kinds of things. So. Yeah, it'll be a super fun time as we start opening more things up. And hopefully, I am looking forward to the day when we can do this group in person and not over Zoom. And so we still have a few facility issues on Wednesday that we're trying to figure out how we could best do something like that to make sure that we are well distanced. But stay tuned because that's something I'm looking forward to. So
That's awesome.
it will be awesome. So, all right. Well, y'all have a good night, and I will.